The quiet street of Willow Creek Lane was usually filled with the sounds of children playing and birds singing. But this morning, the only sound was the low hum of police cars. Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth, a beloved baker known for her sweet smile and even sweeter apple pies, was gone. Found lifeless in her cozy kitchen, a single blow to the head was all it took. Detective Harding surveyed the scene. Yellow tape crisscrossed the front yard, keeping neighbors at bay. Inside, the small house felt cold despite the summer heat. The air hung heavy with the scent of cinnamon, a cruel reminder of the life that was so abruptly ended. No sign of forced entry, Officer Miller reported, notebook in hand. Looks like she knew her attacker. Harding sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. This was never a good sign. A crime of passion? A long simmering feud? The possibilities were endless, and all of them led down dark and twisting paths. The initial investigation turned up little. Mrs. Ainsworth lived a simple life, baking for the local farmer's market and tending to her small garden. She had no known enemies, no apparent reason for anyone to want her dead. Her neighbors were shocked and saddened, offering condolences but little in the way of useful information. They described her as a kind, gentle soul who always had a smile and a warm cookie for everyone. The mailman, the paperboy, even the local teenagers who sometimes played loud music down the street, all spoke of her fondly. Days turned into weeks, and the case grew cold. The evidence was circumstantial, the leads dried up, and the whispers in Willow Creek Lane grew louder. People started locking their doors, suspicion clouding the once friendly atmosphere. Detective Harding felt the weight of the unsolved case pressing down on him. He knew that time was running out. The longer it took to find the killer, the harder it would be to bring them to justice and restore peace to the shattered community. The pressure from the captain was mounting, and Harding knew he needed a break in the case, and fast. He reviewed all of the files, interviewed all of the neighbors a second and third time but found nothing new. It was as if Eleanor had no enemies, and the killer had simply vanished. Harding looked at the crime scene photos again, looking for something, anything, that he and his team had missed. It felt as though there was something there, taunting him, but always out of reach. The lack of progress gnawed at Harding. He spent sleepless nights replaying the events, searching for a missed detail, a forgotten clue. The evidence room was filled with bags of collected items, fibers, fingerprints, even a half-eaten cookie found near the body, but none of it pointed to a specific suspect. The local news picked up the story, adding pressure and speculation. Unsolved murder shakes Willow Creek, one headline screamed. Is your neighbor a killer? Another asked. The once peaceful community was now gripped by fear and paranoia. Harding called another meeting with his team. All right, people, he said, his voice strained. We're going back to square one. I want every witness re-interviewed, every piece of evidence re-examined. We're not giving up on this. The team fanned out, retracing their steps, knocking on doors, and sifting through the already analyzed evidence. Officer Miller, a young, eager detective, focused on the financial records of Mrs. Ainsworth. He found nothing out of the ordinary, a modest savings account, regular donations to the local church, and income from the farmer's market. Detective Jones, a seasoned veteran with a knack for observation, revisited the crime scene, carefully studying the layout of the house, the position of the body, and the surrounding environment. He noticed a small detail that had been overlooked, a faint scratch on the back door, barely visible to the naked eye. Harding, I think I've got something, Jones said over the radio. Possible sign of forced entry, but it's very subtle. Harding rushed back to the house, his heart pounding with renewed hope. He examined the scratch closely, running his fingers over the rough surface. It was indeed faint, but it was there. Could this be the break they needed? The forensic team arrived and carefully collected samples from the scratch. The results came back a few days later, traces of paint that didn't match the door itself. It was a different color, a different type. All right, Harding said, his voice filled with determination. Now we're getting somewhere. Let's find out what kind of car has this paint. The search began, narrowing the vehicles in the neighborhood, comparing the paint samples to registered vehicles that had sustained damage. It was a long shot, but the scratch on the door suggested that it was from a vehicle. Weeks passed with no breakthroughs, and Harding felt as though the case was slipping away again. The captain was on his back, and Harding needed to deliver something soon, or the investigation would be handed to someone else. Harding knew that he was running out of time. Detective Harding found himself back at square one. The paint from the scratch yielded nothing. Every car in the neighborhood, and even some beyond, were checked. No match. The scratch itself was so insignificant that it could have been made by anything, a tree branch, a stray shopping cart, even a child's bicycle. The lack of concrete evidence was a constant source of frustration. The fingerprints found at the scene were smudged and incomplete, useless for identification. The fibers were common, found in almost every household in the area. The half-eaten cookie. A local bakery special, enjoyed by dozens of people. Witnesses offered little help. Most claimed to have seen nothing, heard nothing. Some offered vague descriptions of suspicious individuals, but these descriptions were conflicting and unreliable. The mailman remembered seeing a strange car parked down the street on the day of the murder, but he couldn't recall the make or model. A teenager claimed to have heard a scream, but he was listening to loud music at the time and couldn't be sure. The case was becoming a cold case before his eyes. Harding knew that with each passing day, the chances of finding the killer diminished. Memories faded, witnesses moved away, and evidence became contaminated. The pressure from the captain was relentless. He needed a break, a solid lead, anything to keep the investigation alive. He spent hours poring over the case files, searching for a connection, a pattern, something that would point him in the right direction. He re-interviewed the neighbors, hoping that someone might remember something they had previously overlooked. He even consulted with a psychic, desperate for any kind of insight. But nothing worked. The case remained a frustrating puzzle, a tangled web of unanswered questions. Harding felt like he was chasing a ghost, a phantom killer who had vanished without a trace. He knew that he couldn't give up, that he owed it to Mrs. Ainsworth and the community to find justice. But he also knew that time was running out, and the chances of solving the case were growing slimmer with each passing day. Harding felt as though he was drowning in paperwork, with no life raft in sight. The walls of his office seemed to be closing in on him, and the weight of the unsolved murder threatened to crush him. Amidst the mounting pressure and the frustrating lack of progress, Detective Harding decided to revisit the neighbors one last time. It was a long shot, but he had to exhaust every possibility. He walked down Willow Creek Lane, the yellow police tape a faded reminder of the tragedy that had befallen the community. He approached a small, well-kept house with a blooming rose garden. This was the home of Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman known for her sharp hearing and unwavering routine. She had lived in Willow Creek Lane for over 50 years and knew everything about everyone. Mrs. Gable answered the door with a warm smile and a twinkle in her eye. "Detective Harding, isn't it?" she said, her voice surprisingly strong for her age. Come in, come in. I'll put on some tea." Harding stepped inside the cozy house, filled with the scent of lavender and old books. A small, fluffy dog with big brown eyes trotted over to greet him, wagging its tail enthusiastically. "This is Buster," Mrs. Gable said, patting the dog on the head. "He's my best friend." Buster was a mixed breed, a combination of terrier and something else, maybe a bit of poodle. He was small, but his bark was surprisingly loud and distinct, a high-pitched yelp that could be heard blocks away. Mrs. Gable explained that Buster was very protective of her and would bark at anything he deemed suspicious. Harding sat down at the kitchen table, sipping the tea Mrs. Gable had prepared. He asked her the same questions he had asked before, hoping that something might trigger her memory. Mrs. Gable recounted her routine on the day of the murder, waking up at 6 a.m., walking Buster around the block, having breakfast, and spending the afternoon reading in her garden. As she spoke, Harding couldn't help but notice her sharp attention to detail. She remembered everything, from the color of the flowers in her garden to the names of the birds that visited her bird feeder. He wondered if she might have noticed something unusual on the day of the murder, something that could help him crack the case. He pressed her gently, asking her to think back, to remember anything out of the ordinary. Mrs. Gable frowned in concentration, tapping her fingers on the table. "Well," she said slowly, "there was one thing." Harding leaned forward, his heart pounding with anticipation. Could this be the break he had been waiting for? He certainly hoped so. The captain would be happy to hear that he had made progress. "It's probably nothing, Detective," Mrs. Gable said, "but Buster was barking something fierce on the night Mrs. Ainsworth, well, you know. He usually barks at squirrels or the mailman, but this was different. It was louder. More frantic, you know. Like he was really upset about something." Harding tried to keep his expression neutral, but inside, his mind was racing. A dog barking? It seemed insignificant, almost laughable. But Mrs. Gable was a reliable witness, and Buster's bark was known for being particularly distinctive. "Do you remember what time this was, Mrs. Gable?" Harding asked, trying to keep the eagerness out of his voice. Mrs. Gable thought for a moment, tapping her chin. "Let me see. I usually watch the 9 o'clock news, and Buster started barking right before that. So, it must have been around 8:45, maybe 9 o'clock. Harding pulled out his notebook and jotted down the time. 8:45 to 9 p.m. It was a long shot, but it was something. He thanked Mrs. Gable for her time and promised to keep her updated. As he walked back to his car, Harding couldn't shake the feeling that this seemingly insignificant detail might be the key to unlocking the entire case. He knew that dogs had a keen sense of smell and hearing, and they could often detect things that humans couldn't. He thought about Buster's bark, loud and frantic. What had the dog seen or heard that night? What had triggered such a strong reaction? Could it have been the killer? He decided to check the neighborhood security cameras. There were a few houses on Willow Creek Lane that had cameras installed, and he hoped that one of them might have captured something relevant to the timeline. He spent hours reviewing the footage, fast-forwarding and rewinding, searching for anything unusual. Most of the footage was uneventful: cars driving by, people walking their dogs, the usual nighttime activity of a quiet suburban street. But then, he saw something that caught his eye. A dark sedan, matching the description of a car seen speeding away from the neighborhood, driving slowly past Mrs. Ainsworth's house around 8:50 p.m. The car was too far away to identify the driver, but it was enough to pique his interest. Harding zoomed in on the footage, trying to get a better look at the car. As he did, he noticed something else: a small, dark figure darting across Mrs. Ainsworth's lawn, just moments before the car drove by. It was too blurry to identify, but it looked like a person. Harding rewound the footage and watched it again, his heart pounding with excitement. Was this it? Was this the break he had been waiting for? He felt a surge of adrenaline, a renewed sense of hope that he was finally on the right track. Harding, initially dismissive of Mrs. Gable's anecdote about Buster's barking, now saw it in a new light. He knew he had to revisit her and get a more precise timeline. He drove back to her house, the image of the dark sedan and the blurry figure burned into his mind. Mrs. Gable welcomed him back with another cup of tea and a plate of cookies. "Detective, is everything all right?" she asked, noticing the intensity in his eyes. "Mrs. Gable," Harding said, "that barking you mentioned, it's very important. Can you try to remember exactly what time it was? Anything that might help us narrow it down?" Mrs. Gable closed her eyes, concentrating. "Well, let me think. I remember I was just settling in to watch Murder, She Wrote. It starts at 8 o'clock, but I usually start getting ready about 15 minutes before. So it was maybe around 7:45 when Buster started barking that night." "Did he stop barking right away?" Harding asked, leaning forward. No, Mrs. Gable replied. "He went on for a good 5 or 10 minutes. Barking and carrying on something awful. I even had to tell him to be quiet. Harding's mind was racing. 7:45. The security footage showed the dark sedan driving past Mrs. Ainsworth's house around 8:50 p.m. That meant there was a window of about an hour and 5 minutes between Buster's barking and the appearance of the car. He knew he had to find out who owned the car and where they were during that time. He also needed to identify the blurry figure on the security footage. It was a long shot, but he had a feeling that he was finally on the verge of solving the case. Harding thanked Mrs. Gable again for her help and headed back to the station. He immediately pulled up the list of registered vehicles in the area that matched the description of the dark sedan. There were several possibilities, but one name stood out: Mr. Arthur Peterson, a local businessman who lived just a few blocks away from Mrs. Ainsworth. Harding knew that Peterson had been interviewed earlier in the investigation, but he had an alibi. He claimed to have been at a business dinner in a neighboring town. But Harding also knew that alibis could be fabricated, and he had a feeling that Peterson was hiding something. He decided to bring him in for questioning. The chase was on. Arthur Peterson was a pillar of the community. He owned a successful real estate business, volunteered at the local soup kitchen, and was known for his generous donations to various charities. He was a man of impeccable reputation, the kind of person no one would ever suspect of committing a crime. But beneath the surface of his perfect image lay a web of secrets and financial troubles. His business was on the verge of collapse, and he was deeply in debt to some unsavory characters. He had taken out several loans, mortgaged his house, and even borrowed money from Mrs. Ainsworth, promising to pay her back with interest. But he hadn't paid her back. In fact, he was weeks behind on his payments, and Mrs. Ainsworth had started to pressure him. She needed the money to pay for her medical expenses, and she had made it clear that she would take legal action if he didn't pay up soon. That's when Peterson started to panic. He saw Mrs. Ainsworth as a threat to his carefully constructed life. If she exposed his financial troubles, his reputation would be ruined, and his business would collapse. He had to find a way to silence her. He also had a secret affair with a younger woman, a relationship he desperately wanted to keep hidden from his wife. Mrs. Ainsworth knew about the affair and had threatened to tell Peterson's wife if he didn't repay the loan. This added another layer of desperation to his already precarious situation. When Peterson arrived at the police station, he was calm and composed. He greeted Detective Harding with a friendly smile and offered his full cooperation. He reiterated his alibi, claiming that he had been at a business dinner in a neighboring town on the night of the murder. But Harding wasn't buying it. He knew that Peterson was lying, and he was determined to expose him. He started by asking him about his relationship with Mrs. Ainsworth. Peterson claimed that they were just friends and that he had always admired her. "Did you borrow money from Mrs. Ainsworth, Mr. Peterson?" Harding asked, his voice sharp. Peterson hesitated for a moment, then admitted that he had borrowed a small sum of money. "But I paid her back," he insisted. "I have the receipts to prove it." Harding knew that Peterson was lying again. He had already checked Peterson's bank records, and there was no evidence of any payments to Mrs. Ainsworth. He decided to confront him with the security footage. "Mr. Peterson," Harding said, "we have evidence that your car was near Mrs. Ainsworth's house on the night of the murder. Can you explain that?" Peterson's face paled. He knew he was trapped. The game was up. Harding leaned forward, waiting for the confession. Peterson's alibi, at first glance, seemed airtight. He claimed he was attending a business dinner at the Oakwood Grill, a reputable restaurant in the neighboring town of Oakhaven, about an hour's drive from Willow Creek Lane. He provided the names of 3 colleagues who were supposedly present at the dinner: Mr. Henderson, Ms. Davies, and Mr. Clark. Harding's team immediately contacted these individuals. Mr. Henderson and Ms. Davies both confirmed Peterson's account, stating that he was indeed present at the dinner and remained there for the entire evening. They recalled discussing business matters and enjoying a pleasant meal. Mr. Clark, however, was out of the country on vacation and could not be reached for comment. The initial statements from Henderson and Davies seemed to solidify Peterson's alibi. They were respected professionals, and their accounts aligned perfectly with Peterson's. Harding felt a pang of frustration. Was he chasing a ghost? Was Peterson truly innocent? However, Harding was not one to give up easily. He decided to delve deeper into the alibi, scrutinizing every detail. He obtained the restaurant's reservation records and confirmed that Peterson's name was indeed on the guest list for that evening. He also reviewed the restaurant's security footage, which showed Peterson arriving at the restaurant around 7:30 p.m. But something didn't quite add up. The security footage also showed Peterson leaving the restaurant briefly around 8:15 p.m., returning about 20 minutes later. When Harding questioned Henderson and Davies about this, they claimed not to remember Peterson leaving the table. Harding's suspicion grew. Why would Peterson leave the dinner for 20 minutes without anyone noticing? Where did he go? He decided to investigate further, focusing on those missing 20 minutes. He started by checking traffic camera footage along the route between Oakhaven and Willow Creek Lane. He found footage of a dark sedan, matching the description of Peterson's car, speeding towards Willow Creek Lane around 8:20 p.m. and then returning to Oakhaven around 8:40 p.m. The timing was perfect. It would have been just enough time for Peterson to drive to Mrs. Ainsworth's house, commit the murder, and then return to the restaurant before anyone noticed he was gone. Harding knew he was close to cracking the case. He just needed to find the missing piece of the puzzle. He hoped that Clark would return soon and be able to give some more clarity. Perhaps he had seen something that Henderson and Davies had missed. The pressure was still on to crack the case. Harding knew that the traffic camera footage was circumstantial evidence at best. He needed something more solid to connect Peterson to the crime. He remembered Mrs. Gable's description of Buster's bark, loud, frantic, and distinctive. He wondered if there was a way to use that information to strengthen his case. He decided to consult with a canine expert, Dr. Emily Carter, a veterinarian specializing in dog behavior and vocalizations. Dr. Carter listened intently as Harding described Buster's bark. "You said it's a high-pitched yelp, almost like a scream?" Dr. Carter asked. "And Mrs. Gable says it's different from his usual barks?" Harding nodded. "That's right. She said it was like he was really upset about something." Dr. Carter explained that dog barks can vary greatly depending on the breed, size, and temperament of the dog. She also said that dogs can change their barks depending on the situation. A playful bark is different from a warning bark, and a fear bark is different from an aggressive bark. "Buster is a mixed breed, part terrier, part something else," Harding said. "Mrs. Gable isn't sure what else he is." Dr. Carter suggested that they try to record Buster's bark and analyze its acoustic properties. She explained that some dog barks are so unique that they can be identified like fingerprints. Harding obtained a warrant and returned to Mrs. Gable's house with Dr. Carter. Mrs. Gable was happy to cooperate, and Buster was eager to show off his barking skills. Dr. Carter recorded several samples of Buster's bark in different situations: when he was playing, when he was guarding the house, and when he was startled. Back in her lab, Dr. Carter analyzed the recordings using specialized software. She compared Buster's bark to thousands of other dog barks in her database. The results were astonishing. "Detective," Dr. Carter said, "Buster's bark is incredibly unique. The combination of pitch, frequency, and pattern is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's like a canine signature." She explained that she could create an acoustic profile of Buster's bark that could be used to identify it in any audio recording. Harding realized that this was exactly what he needed. He could use Buster's bark to confirm that he was barking at the time Peterson was near Mrs. Ainsworth's house. He was one step closer to catching a killer. He now had another piece of evidence to place Peterson at the scene of the crime. It was all coming together. Armed with Dr. Carter's acoustic profile of Buster's bark, Harding and his team embarked on a painstaking search of any available audio recordings from the neighborhood. They canvassed Willow Creek Lane, asking residents if they had security cameras with audio recording capabilities. Several homeowners agreed to share their footage. Harding's team spent days poring over hours of audio, listening for the telltale sound of Buster's unique yelp. It was a tedious and time-consuming process, but Harding knew that it could be the key to unlocking the case. They focused their search on the timeframe Mrs. Gable had provided, between 7:45 p.m. and 8 p.m. on the night of the murder. They used Dr. Carter's software to analyze the audio, searching for matches to Buster's acoustic profile. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they found something. A security camera on a house across the street from Mrs. Ainsworth's had captured a faint audio recording of what sounded like Buster's bark around 7:52 p.m. Harding zoomed in on the audio waveform, comparing it to Dr. Carter's profile. The match wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to warrant further investigation. He enhanced the audio, filtering out background noise and amplifying the faint sound of the bark. The enhanced audio revealed something even more significant. Just before Buster's bark, there was the distinct sound of a car door closing. And then, a few seconds later, the sound of footsteps approaching Mrs. Ainsworth's house. Harding felt a surge of adrenaline. He had it. He had proof that someone was near Mrs. Ainsworth's house at the time Buster was barking. And he knew that Peterson's car was seen speeding away from the neighborhood shortly after that. He showed the audio recording and the enhanced waveform to Dr. Carter. She confirmed that the sound was almost certainly Buster's bark and that the other sounds were consistent with a car door closing and footsteps. "Detective," Dr. Carter said, "this is incredibly strong evidence. It places someone at the scene of the crime at the time Mrs. Gable said Buster was barking." Harding knew that he had enough evidence to confront Peterson again. He had the traffic camera footage, the security camera footage, the audio recording of Buster's bark, and Peterson's inconsistent alibi. He was confident that he could finally break Peterson and get him to confess. The net was closing in. He could feel it. The grainy, almost ghostly image flickered on the screen. It was security camera footage from a house 2 doors down from Mrs. Ainsworth, captured on the night of the murder. The quality was poor, the resolution low, but Harding could make out the blurred outline of a dark sedan parked briefly near the victim's house. The timestamp on the footage aligned with the timeframe Mrs. Gable had provided for Buster's barking, between 7:45 p.m. and 8 p.m. The car was parked just out of range of the camera's main focus, making it difficult to identify the make and model with certainty. But Harding had a strong suspicion it was Peterson's car. He enhanced the image, sharpening the edges and reducing the noise. The outline of the car became clearer, revealing details that confirmed Harding's suspicions. The taillights, the shape of the roof, even the angle of the side mirrors, they all matched the description of Peterson's dark sedan. Harding zoomed in on the license plate, but it was too blurry to read. He ran the image through a forensic analysis program, hoping to extract the license plate number. The program was able to partially reconstruct the plate, revealing a few of the letters and numbers. Harding checked the DMV database, searching for vehicles that matched the partial license plate number. There were several possibilities, but only one matched the description of Peterson's car. The license plate number was a perfect match. He had it. He had irrefutable evidence that Peterson's car was near Mrs. Ainsworth's house around the time of the murder. Combined with the audio recording of Buster's bark and Peterson's inconsistent alibi, the evidence was overwhelming. Harding knew that he had enough to confront Peterson again, and this time, he was confident that he could break him. He summoned Peterson back to the police station, his face grim. The game was over. When Peterson arrived, he looked nervous and agitated. He fidgeted in his chair, avoiding eye contact with Harding. He knew that something was up. Harding laid out the evidence, one piece at a time. The traffic camera footage, the security camera footage, the audio recording of Buster's bark, and the forensic analysis of his car. Peterson's face grew paler with each piece of evidence. "Mr. Peterson," Harding said, his voice cold and hard, "we know you were there. We know you killed Mrs. Ainsworth. It's time to tell the truth." Peterson remained silent, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. The evidence was irrefutable. He was trapped. He knew it was only a matter of time before he broke. He needed to think, and fast. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Peterson stubbornly maintained his innocence. "I didn't do it, detective," he insisted, his voice trembling slightly. "I was at that business dinner. You have to believe me." Harding leaned across the table, his eyes fixed on Peterson's. "We have evidence that your car was near Mrs. Ainsworth's house on the night of the murder, Mr. Peterson. We have audio recordings that place you at the scene. We know you're lying about your alibi." Peterson shook his head, his face contorted with fear and desperation. "It's a mistake," he stammered. "The camera must have been mistaken. I was at the dinner. Ask my colleagues." Harding sighed. "We did ask your colleagues, Mr. Peterson. And they said you left the dinner for 20 minutes. Where did you go?" Peterson hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. I needed some air," he said weakly. "I went for a walk." "A walk to Mrs. Ainsworth's house?" Harding asked, raising an eyebrow. Peterson remained silent, his face flushed. "Mr. Peterson," Harding continued, "we know about your financial troubles. We know you owed Mrs. Ainsworth money. We know she was threatening to expose your affair. You had a motive, and you had the opportunity. The evidence is overwhelming." Peterson closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping. He knew he was trapped. He could feel the walls closing in around him. But still, he refused to confess. "I didn't do it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I swear, I didn't do it." Harding knew that he needed to try a different approach. He decided to appeal to Peterson's sense of guilt and remorse. "Mr. Peterson," Harding said softly, "Mrs. Ainsworth was a kind and generous woman. She didn't deserve to die like that. You need to do the right thing. You need to confess and bring closure to her family and..." To further solidify the evidence against Peterson, Harding sought the expertise of a forensic audio analyst, Mr. David Miller. Miller was a seasoned professional with years of experience analyzing sound recordings for law enforcement agencies. Harding provided Miller with the audio recording captured from the security camera across the street from Mrs. Ainsworth's house, as well as Dr. Carter's acoustic profile of Buster's bark. He asked Miller to analyze the recording and determine with certainty whether the sound was indeed Buster's bark and whether there were any other sounds of significance. Miller spent several hours analyzing the recording, using state-of-the-art audio enhancement and analysis software. He filtered out background noise, amplified the faint sounds, and compared the audio waveform to Dr. Carter's profile. The results were conclusive. "Detective," Miller said, "I can confirm with 99% certainty that the sound on this recording is Buster's bark. The acoustic properties match Dr. Carter's profile perfectly." He also pointed out other sounds of interest on the recording. Just before the bark, there's the distinct sound of a car door closing. And then, a few seconds later, the sound of footsteps approaching Mrs. Ainsworth's house. These sounds are consistent with someone parking their car and walking towards the house. Miller prepared a detailed report outlining his findings, including spectrograms and audio waveforms that visually demonstrated the match between the recording and Dr. Carter's profile. The report was a powerful piece of evidence, further strengthening the case against Peterson. Harding presented Miller's report to Peterson, along with the other evidence. Peterson's face grew even paler as he read the report. He knew that there was no denying it any longer. The evidence was overwhelming. He was trapped. "It's over, Peterson," Harding said, his voice firm. "There's nowhere left to run. It's time to tell the truth." Peterson remained silent for a long moment, his eyes filled with despair. Then, finally, he spoke. "Okay, detective," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'll tell you everything." The confession was about to begin. All thanks to the distinct bark of Buster. It was a sound that Peterson would never forget. The sound that unraveled everything. As Peterson began to confess, the details of his carefully constructed alibi began to crumble. He admitted that he had borrowed money from Mrs. Ainsworth and that she had been pressuring him to repay it. He also admitted to the affair, acknowledging that Mrs. Ainsworth had threatened to expose it to his wife. He recounted how he had left the business dinner in Oakhaven, driven to Willow Creek Lane, and confronted Mrs. Ainsworth at her home. He claimed that they had argued, and in a moment of rage, he had struck her with a heavy vase. With Peterson's confession underway, Harding's team revisited Mr. Henderson and Ms. Davies, the colleagues who had initially corroborated Peterson's alibi. Confronted with the evidence and Peterson's own admissions, their stories began to change. Mr. Henderson, a nervous and somewhat timid man, admitted that he had only confirmed Peterson's alibi because Peterson was his boss, and he feared losing his job. He confessed that he hadn't paid close attention to Peterson's whereabouts during the dinner and that he couldn't be certain that Peterson had been there the entire time. Ms. Davies, a more assertive and ambitious woman, initially maintained her story. But after hours of questioning, she finally cracked. She admitted that she had known about Peterson's affair and that he had promised her a promotion if she supported his alibi. She revealed that Peterson had asked her to cover for him, saying that it was a matter of life and death. With Henderson and Davies recanting their stories, Peterson's alibi completely collapsed. He was left with no defense, no way to explain the overwhelming evidence against him. The carefully constructed lies had unraveled, exposing the truth for all to see. The community of Willow Creek Lane was shocked and horrified by the news of Peterson's confession. They had trusted him, respected him, and admired him. Now, they learned that he was a liar, a cheat, and a murderer. The sense of betrayal was palpable. The case that had once seemed hopeless was now closed. Justice had been served, thanks to the sharp ears of Mrs. Gable and the distinct bark of her loyal companion, Buster. It was a reminder that even the smallest details can be significant and that the truth will always come to light, no matter how hard someone tries to hide it. Harding felt a sense of relief. He had done his job, and he had brought closure to the community. The memory of Eleanor Ainsworth would live on. The confession poured out of Peterson, a torrent of guilt and regret. He described in detail how he had planned to confront Mrs. Ainsworth, hoping to persuade her to give him more time to repay the loan. But the argument had escalated, and in a moment of blind rage, he had struck her with a vase, not intending to kill her, but knowing instantly that he had. He spoke of his panic, his desperate attempts to cover up the crime, and his growing fear as the investigation intensified. He revealed how he had persuaded his colleagues to lie for him, promising them rewards and threatening them with consequences. As he spoke, Peterson seemed to shrink in his chair, the weight of his actions crushing him. He was no longer the respected businessman, the pillar of the community. He was just a broken man, consumed by guilt and remorse. "I never meant for it to happen," he sobbed, his voice choked with emotion. "I just wanted her to give me more time. I didn't want to hurt her." Harding listened in silence, his face impassive. He had heard it all before. The excuses, the justifications, the hollow apologies. It was all part of the same tired script. But as Peterson continued to speak, Harding sensed a genuine element of remorse. He realized that Peterson was not just sorry for getting caught, but that he was truly sorry for what he had done. "It's all because of that dog," Peterson muttered, his voice filled with bitterness. "If it hadn't been for that stupid dog, I would have gotten away with it." Harding felt a flicker of satisfaction. It was true. Buster's bark had been the key to unlocking the entire case. A seemingly insignificant detail had exposed Peterson's lies and brought him to justice. Peterson was formally charged with murder and taken into custody. As he was led away, he glanced back at Harding, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. He knew that his life was over. The realization that a dog's bark had exposed him was a bitter pill to swallow. It was a humiliating end for a man who had always prided himself on his intelligence and his ability to control his own destiny. He had been outsmarted by a small, fluffy dog with a big bark. The irony was almost unbearable. The case was closed. Justice had been served. The quiet community of Willow Creek Lane could finally begin to heal. The Peterson case became a local sensation. The media hailed Buster as a hero, the barking bloodhound, who had solved the unsolvable murder. Mrs. Gable and Buster were thrust into the spotlight, receiving accolades and awards from the community and beyond. Mrs. Gable, ever humble, insisted that she had done nothing special. "I just remembered what Buster barked," she said with a shrug. "He's a good dog." Buster, for his part, seemed to enjoy the attention. He lapped up the praise and the extra treats, wagging his tail and barking happily whenever he saw a camera. He even had his picture taken with the mayor, receiving a special key to the city, a chew toy shaped like a key. The Ainsworth family expressed their gratitude to Mrs. Gable and Buster, as well as to Detective Harding and his team. They said that Peterson's conviction had brought them a sense of closure and that they could finally begin to heal from their loss. Detective Harding, though pleased with the outcome of the case, remained characteristically modest. He credited the hard work of his team and the crucial contribution of Mrs. Gable and Buster. He knew that without them, the case might never have been solved. The yellow police tape was removed from Willow Creek Lane, and the community slowly began to return to normal. The neighbors started talking to each other again, the children started playing in the streets, and the birds started singing in the trees. Mrs. Ainsworth's house was eventually sold to a young couple who planned to open a bakery, carrying on her legacy of delicious treats and warm smiles. The scent of cinnamon once again filled the air, a reminder of the life that had been lost and the hope that had been restored. And every evening, as the sun set over Willow Creek Lane, Mrs. Gable could be seen walking Buster around the block, his distinct bark echoing through the quiet streets. It was a sound that had once struck fear into the heart of a killer, but now, it was a symbol of justice, hope, and the unwavering power of a small dog with a big heart. The case was closed, but the memory of Mrs. Ainsworth, the bravery of Buster, and the dedication of Detective Harding would live on in the hearts of the people of Willow Creek Lane. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, and that even the smallest among us can make a difference. And that sometimes, all it takes is a dog's bark to bring a killer to justice. The end.